Hello, thank you for tuning in. It's Joe Simhart here again, and it's September 2nd, Labor Day, 2024. I want to respond today to some criticisms I've gotten from people that don't like what I say in some of these videos about their group or their guru or about someone they admire. Like Meher Baba or Eckhart Tolle. I get some blowback that I shouldn't be picking on them because they are not really cults. In other words, they're assuming that I'm doing some kind of equivocation or a false equivalency, aligning them with, say, Eckhart Tolle with Charles Manson, because I'm talking about cults. So let's get something cleared up here. I want to state that I'm not equating those things. But let's look at the terms. Equivocation. When people equivocate, they're basically using ambiguous language and claiming that one thing might equal another when they're not really defining what that is. So equivocation basically means the use of ambiguous language to conceal the truth or to avoid committing oneself, prevarication. You often hear politicians say something like, I say this without equivocation, so I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm not, equating something that shouldn't be there. I'm not trying to be ambiguous, blah, blah, blah. So they're trying to also avoid being accused of having a false equivalence. And what that means is a false equivalence or false equivalency is an informal fallacy in which an equivalence is drawn between two subjects based on flawed or false reasoning. This fallacy is categorized as a fallacy of inconsistency. Colloquially, a false equivalence is often called comparing apples and oranges. So, people might think I'm comparing Meher Baba or Eckhart Tolle or Krishnamurti or whoever, which, aren't necessarily harmful cults in that definition, with something like the group I was in, Church Universal and Triumphant or Scientology or whatever, which have been accused of being more cult-like and certainly have provided us with lots of evidence that they behave that way. So I'm not trying to equivocate in that sense. I'm trying to be more subtle in these videos and coming up with reasons why I feel there's discrepancies with certain groups that can be criticized. So let's look again at the definition of the word cult, which is at the core of what I'm doing here. And you have to also understand that we have the idea of cult is really something which is at the core of almost every religion that's ever come around. There's a cult of something at the core of Catholicism, and the main cult is the cult of the Eucharist. The Catholic Mass is what all Catholics are attracted to, and during the Mass there's this magical or transformational event when the priest holds up the host and proclaims that it is becoming the body and blood of Christ, and then the wine, which becomes the blood during these invocations. And then the ritual accompanying that is to ingest these substances, the body and the blood, in the species or in the form of bread and wine. You can criticize that all you want, but there's really nothing wrong with this cult. It's more or less a ritual at the core of a particular religion. In most of Protestantism, we have the cult of the book, the Bible. That becomes more or less the sacred object, which cannot be violated. In some cases, it has to be taken literally. And that can mean anything depending on what the literal interpretation is of that particular sect. And there's over 1,500 or more sects in Christianity. So, to look at this a little more clearly, I did something called the Cult of the Cat a few videos ago. And, we can look at this using the word cat instead of guru or group. And so when we're discussing cats, we can make a lot of general statements, which are true about all cats, from lions to ocelots to house cats. They fit a kind of a species or interspecies kind of an animal. But when we are discussing a cat, a group, or a guru, it is better to refine what we say about that cat, the cat. Even house cats have variations in temperament and behavior and medical issues and whatever. So in the same way, when we're looking at cult, we have to throw the word out and look at the group, the behavior of that particular group, and also layers within that group of what kind of behavior we're talking about. Not everybody that belongs to, say, a group like Scientology behaves the same way or is invested in the same way. What we quite call the more manipulative aspect of it might be the core of the group, the leader, the leader's lieutenants, the leader's lawyers, and whatever. But the average person in the pew, or the average attendee at a some kind of a conference led by a guru, is not necessarily part of a harmful cult or doing harmful cult-like activity. So let's look at what the American Heritage Dictionary says about cult, and this is an old 1994 edition. So, like any kind of word in language, cult can migrate in definition depending on context, depending on culture, depending on time, then depending on use. So in this particular book, number one definition is a system of religious worship and ritual. Pretty benign, fairly neutral. A cat is a cat, a rose is a rose, okay. Number two definition is a religion or sect considered extremist or false. So that number two definition is what I tend to look at, but I keep in mind the number one definition, which is neutral. You have to start somewhere, and you start with that. And then the third one here is obsessive devotion to a person or principle. And then the second part of that is the object of such devotion. So we can have special devotion to an object, an idea, a movement, a person, a principle, a political group, whatever. As you can see, the first definition, a system of religion, religious worship or ritual, is not necessarily problematic. It's a description of a type of human behavior. But by the time you get to the second definition, now we have an us and them thing, a religion or sect considered extremist or false. In other words, not like us, or taking some of our beliefs and pushing them to an extreme. For instance, in Christianity, we have apocalyptic groups. Every single generation, or many of them during a generation, will predict the end of the world, the end times. And people can get caught up in it. And of course, it comes and goes, and we move on. The group has to go through cognitive dissonance if they are to survive, rationalize why the predicted event didn't happen, and then say, well, the signs are still there. We still have to hunker down and build bomb shelters and store water and stop allowing the government to take our money and invest in gold, and you know the story. So that narrative can continue even if a prediction is false. So, all right, so the two words equivocation and false equivalence. If I'm criticized, people criticize me based on this idea that I'm making a false equivalence when I'm trying not to. And, I'm not, when I'm criticizing Eckhart Tolle, for instance, and some of the things he indicates in his teaching, it's not that he is like Charles Manson or not that he is like a Jim Jones. I'm not saying that. So please look at what I'm trying to say. Please realize that the word cult has many nuances in its definition, and it depends on how it's applied. And also don't quickly accuse me of a false equivalence. Take a deeper look at what I'm saying and realize that no guru is without flaws, and we can criticize what we see in a climate of free speech. So that's basically all I'm doing. Anyway, enjoy your day, and thank you for listening, and hope this clears up a few things for people that tend to think I'm equivocating or using false equivalency when I'm really trying not to. Thank you.